Hi, my name's Jordan Marshall and I'm Special Projects Editor at Building. Today I'm really excited. At Building, we're hosting the CLC's review of 2021, progress and success it's made in the year, and its plan for 2022. To kick things off, I'm just going to run through a little bit of housekeeping. For everyone who's watching, we really want you to get involved and send through your questions, so to do that, there's a panel on the right-hand side. Please send through those questions, and as many of them as possible will be worked in by our panelists today, who are among the industry's biggest figures, so it's going to be a great session. Also, one that we always get in terms of housekeeping matters is this going to be available on demand? If you've heard something you want to catch up on, you want to recommend it to a colleague, yes, it'll be hosted on online, free, on demand, moving forward via the same link you've joined today. So there'll be absolutely no problem with that. So today's session is going to go for about 90 minutes. We're going to hear from a range of different aspects about what the CLC has been doing. So I think it's all going to go fantastically. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Andy Mitchell. I'm just going to pull up your slides, Andy, and then you can kick things off for us.
Okay, thank you, Jordan. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this town hall, reflecting on the progress and successes of 2021 and then looking forward to 2022. I'm going to say a few words, sort of recapping on where we were. Hopefully at that point, I'll be handing over to Minister Lee Rowley. And after that, we're going to hear from Hannah Vickers and Stuart Young and Peter Capelhorn and Mark Reynolds and Fergus Harradence on different aspects of the important things coming up for 2022. And we hope to get through all of that such that we've got in the region of 25 minutes of Q&A at the end that I'll do my best to try and steer us through, if that's okay. So what I'd like to do, I'm sure people have seen the annual review. It's quite a substantial document, and we've tried to make it accessible without too much detail, but inevitably there is quite a lot of detail that we felt it important to portray. What I'm not going to do here is just repeat what has been very well presented in the annual review, but I thought I'd like to share a few personal reflections. For me, obviously, particularly as I'm preparing to stand down and focus on the day job. And, you know, above all of the tangible achievements and deliverables, you know, for me, 2021 saw a consolidation of the CLC as a credible voice of the industry and a credible and effective vehicle for industry and government to work together for a stronger industry and a better future. And as I say, we're going to hear from a number of the CLC shortly about the plans for the future. But standing back that far to that end, I'm immensely encouraged by and appreciative of the engagement with Minister Lee Rowley, which is very positive, and it's allowing the industry government relationship to feel even more joined up and frank and open than I think it's ever been. So I'm hoping if we can go to the next slide, please, Jordan. So I'm only seeing some of that, not all of that. That's the same as some nods from a few others as well. Is there any way we can scroll through that? That's the same thing. It's a partially truncated piece. So this is
sorry, so what are you seeing? I'll just see if I can fix it.
So I'm seeing probably 2/3 of it, with the bottom right-hand corner being complete, but the top left-hand corner missing.
It's odd, it looks full on my screen. I'll exit and come back in.
Yeah. So this is actually just the extract of the graphic that's on page 12 of the annual review anyway. And I'm hoping that that's a graphic that is familiar to most people. It shows How we've described the industry by four groups, what we've been calling the horizontals, and how we've identified the key work streams as the verticals. And obviously that creates a matrix which helps us understand how each of the the vertical work streams relates to each of the different industry groups. And as simple as this graphic looks, I'll be honest, it has taken quite a while for us to land on exactly what it looks like and how we present it. And on the one hand, it's a simple image, but it obviously it's a matrix, and that has been very helpful. And of course, underneath that matrix is a lot of detail necessary detail as to how different work streams. Let's take the data and digital one. We've still got the same partial image there, Jordan. But take the data and digital. That means something quite different to the domestic repairs and renewals on housing, as it does to the big infrastructure works that the infrastructure client group members pursue. So you do need to look at all of the work streams that we've got in that way. Same for skills, same for all of the others. Hopefully that sort of lays out. There we go. Thank you very much. Hopefully that is a useful go-to, as I say, because it does describe the top level, and there's an awful lot of wiring underneath that. Of course, the structure of the CLC with the steering coordination group, which is effectively a subset of the task force, is something that we find helpful, because the task force is some 25 people, and whilst we still meet on a weekly basis, that's a lot of people to try and to get to quick consensus with, perhaps. So we have that, and of course we have the senior advisors who play an important role in, I suppose, keeping us honest, as also keeping us holding us to account, and acting, as we've said, a little bit like a sort of non-exec directors on a board, of being that critical friend. And that structure has served us well. And obviously, as I move on, one of the opportunities for the next co-chair is to perhaps consider what's worked and what could be improved on all of that. But that's certainly how it looks, and I think something pretty similar will carry on through. So I didn't really want to dive into a lot more detail, because that's what we've got our speakers here to talk to. I don't know now if we have Minister Rowley with us.
Not yet, unfortunately.
No. Well, then I think what we better do is get into looking at the overview of priorities for 2022. And first up is Hannah Vickers and Stuart Young covering Construct Zero. So am I handing over to Hannah and the dog?
Thanks, Andy. And yeah, I have got a furry co-host today, and I will warn you, he might make noise in the background.
That's no way to talk about Stuart.
Okay, we're having the same problem there. If we can just go to the other view on the slides, and I'll kick off. So we're going to do this as a bit of a double act. I'm going to give a bit of a history of Construct Zero, and then Stuart is going to do a bit of a call to action around how you might be able to get involved. So if I could have the next slide, please. In terms of those of you who may not have come across Construct Zero before, the most effective thing we thought the CLC could do, and you can see this is a quote here from Andy when he first tasked me with starting Construct Zero, was actually to help coordinate and understand all of the activity that is going on across the sector, and to accelerate action. So what we have here really is a bit of a change programme that tries to bring about a faster transition for the sector to net zero by capitalising on all of the work that's going on already. So we aren't really here to be inventing new things. We are here to be signposting, joining up, and looking at gaps in the things that we're already doing across the sector. So trying to make the best use of the CLC's network to deliver that. So that's the first thing to probably take note of with Construct Zero, and that means that we're hugely open to people's own initiatives, best practice and things, and Stuart will talk a little bit later on about how you can get involved in that. But really that's what we're trying to do here, is join things up. Can I have the next slide, please? I'm going to cover off the structure of the programme because we're still relatively new. We've only been in existence for a year. And the three areas that we focus on, and we think the CLC is best placed to focus on, are around performance measurement. So trying to use a way to quantify what needs to be done for the sector to transition to net zero, and this is the sector as a whole, and then being able to measure that and demonstrate progress so that we can give that update to government, we can give that update to people who'd be interested outside of the sector, and it just sort of holds ourselves to account. So that's a really sort of central part of what we're doing in Construct Zero, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. The second strand of activities is all around signposting and support, and I alluded to this in my introduction, whereby what we're trying to do is accelerate industry learning, accelerate joining up businesses, joining up disparate parts of the sector who will learn better if they start to talk to each other around things like net zero or zero diesel construction sites, for example. So we have a big strand of activity around signposting and support, and we've just put in place some really specific topics we're going to focus on this year, which we know are the things from our sort of first year's worth of engaging with the industry that won't happen unless we take a joined up collaborative approach. So I'll cover those in a second. And then finally, comms and engagement, which is a massive part of what the CLC is known for, has done really well during COVID, and is something now we want to try and turn our attentions to as we move to the transition to net zero. And Stuart leads that strand, and he will talk to you a little bit later on about that. So those are our three sort of pieces of activity, if you like, in Construct Zero. If I could have the next slide, I'm just going to give a little bit of a history around what we've done to date, seeing as this is the annual review, and then I'm going to look at what we're doing this year. So when we first started with Construct Zero, one of the main things that we needed to bottom out was actually where do we focus our efforts. So as the CLC, we needed to be clear on what were the priorities for us in terms of reaching net zero. So this isn't everything the sector needs to do, but these are the things that we won't get to net zero if we don't do them. So the sort of 80-20 rule. And what this allows us to do is to sort of monitor, report progress on, and focus our efforts on making sure these 9 things happen. So they won't be a surprise to you, but what it does for the first time is try and get down in one place all of the things that we think we need to do. So you can see it's split by transport, buildings and construction activity. And what we found when we first started engaging and when we first started at using things like the Committee on Climate Change carbon budget to analyse these is some of them, not uncommon, but some of them were getting more attention than others, not necessarily on the basis of what was going to have the biggest impact, but on the basis of who was shouting the loudest or who was making the most progress. So what we've been able to outline with the 9 priorities is put the science, the proper science from the Committee on Climate Change behind what we know needs to happen, and make sure that we're getting appropriate airtime with government, putting appropriate industry effort into making sure that these 9 things happen and happen at the pace that they need to. So I won't go through them in too much detail, other than to say we split them across these 3 areas. You know, transport is everything that we do within the sector. You know, looking at what we do on site, looking at what we do to reduce transport to site, and also looking at where we put developments and how we make sure that they're connected up to the low carbon methods of transport that we've got sort of coming online through the DFT. Buildings is relatively simple, it covers both new build but also retrofitting existing, and how we can look at energy performance going forward. And construction activity is all about understanding our impact, designing out carbon, which you'll probably know as dealing with embodied carbon, but also looking at our low carbon materials and the manufacturing and production processes that sit behind them. If we can have the next slide, please. So in terms of what we did over the last year, I'll just cover this very briefly. I'm happy for these slides to be circulated, but effectively what we did was establish those 9 priorities, build the framework for us to run the 3 strands of activity, including the performance framework and establishing the metrics, and then started really from the beginning of this year to look at using that. So we went to COP26, we gave a really good showcase of what the industry's up to, what progress we've made, where we've got gaps, and actually now what we're looking to do is to fill in some of those gaps, if you like, during 2022, but also to try to use a lot more of the network that we've created, and particularly the network that exists outside of the construction sector, so partnering with the likes of NatWest and some of the professional services, Big Four, to be able to really affect change and get our story out there. If I could have the next slide, please. So I mentioned there were 3 strands of activity. The first one I wanted to just show you was around the performance framework. So what we did, as part of our establishing the programme last year was take the 9 priorities and put behind them a set of ambitions and a set of measurable metrics that we will be monitoring on a quarterly basis to see how far and how fast we are going towards net zero, and then being able to play that back, and obviously really powerful to be able to play that back to the government, as well as taking stock and reflecting ourselves. So this is an example of that. Stuart will mention in a minute, we've got the next quarterly performance update coming out shortly, but we will be doing this on a quarterly basis, and it's measurable, so there's nowhere to hide, which is useful and challenging at the same time. So that's something to look at. We do that sector-wide. The second strand of activity, which is the last thing I wanted to cover today, around our areas where we're going to be focusing this business, basically focusing our efforts to catalyse the change to net zero. So if I go to the next slide, please. What we've got in 2022 are areas that we know we're not going to make progress unless we start to collaborate. So these are the 5. I'll just whiz through them very quickly, but what we're going to do is take stock of the policy environment and see where there has been enough policy laid down by government, where we feel like there's a gap potentially. We're going to look at consistent measurement and use of data. There's a hell of a lot of activity going on in this space, but we need to settle on something which is consistent and we can signpost and get behind. There's a big piece of work around enabling zero diesel sites. This is industry wide. So here we're trying to get the developers and the tier 1s and the house builders and the extended supply chain to work together in a way that means that not just individual businesses, but the whole sector can successfully transition to zero diesel sites. We're looking at funding and financing. We know there are still some gaps in that space around what we need to be able to get into net zero in the built environment. And finally, there's a piece around public engagement. So are we giving the public enough information through our builders merchants, through our engagement with the SME builders to actually make net zero choices? So those are the things that we're working on this year. I'm just going to hand over briefly to Stuart to give you a bit of a call to action around how you can get involved.
Thanks, Hannah. I've also got two dogs in the background as well, which hopefully they will be as quiet as Hannah's was. So good morning, everyone. I hope you're all well, and thank you for taking the time to join us today. So as Hannah mentioned, I lead on the communications work from Construct Zero. So we published our first quarterly update report in November of last year at the point of COP, which was a really good kind of report, and bringing all together for the first time a set of industry metrics against which the sector can monitor its progress to net zero. We will be publishing the second update report on the 16th of March, so please keep an eye out for that. There's a lot of work going on behind the scenes with that, and we are seeing some really good examples of good progress on that. For example, in particular around the kind of the upskilling of professional qualifications within the sector, but we also know that we need to kind of continue to do more on quicker and not take the foot off the pedal, so to speak. So do keep an eye on that, and there'll be kind of quite a considerable amount of social media comms coming out on that event. And as the slide mentions, we've got a hybrid event taking place on the 16th of March to launch the event. Andy has very kindly agreed to host it at Tideways offices, and due to demand, we're also putting it on as a hybrid event, which the Minister will be speaking at. And what that event will be, it's an opportunity to come together to celebrate the work of Construct Zero so far, but also to pose the question of what the challenges are, what more do we need to do, where do we need to do it, and also in terms of kind of focus on the way, looking at kind of who that is it industry, is it government, is it kind of a joined up partnership there? But really just kind of that event's also going to provide an opportunity for many of you who perhaps not met some of the Construct Zero team to come together, meet the Minister, and have a kind of that kind of event. Second, next slide, please. Thank you. So talking a bit more about our business champions and partners, and hopefully many of you on the call this morning are already engaged in the programme as one or the other. So we've got already over 70 business champions, and Katrina Duncan in my team on this call this morning manages that. So we've got over 70 of those, and we're commissioning them out monthly. There is a current commission out for further business champions, so if you want to get involved in that, please do reach out to myself, and we would very much welcome your engagement. On the Construct Zero partners, we've now got over 80 going well and beyond across the sector. So for example, just the key headlines, PwC UK, we've got NatWest on board, CBI, and we've got another major announcement coming at the end of this month, which I won't spoil at present, but just to keep your eyes out at the end of this month, quite a significant announcement from the programme. And as the slide notes, we've also kind of gone globally now. So we've reached out and engaging now with partners in Australia and in America. So really kind of good recognition of the role that construction is playing in the global sector. So I'll go quickly given the time. In 2021, focus on establishing the programme. 2022 is going to see us continue to grow and scale the programme. This year, we're going to be focusing on our network of partners and champions, but with a focus on quality, not quantity, given the kind of the wide range we've already got. And we'll be looking now to, following feedback from a number of you, we'll be looking to actively engage partners and champions in a series of our kind of 5 sprint projects that Hannah mentioned earlier, plus also giving a number of you greater kind of promotion for our work. So, for example, with the third quarterly report, which we're looking at just before July, we'll be looking to bring in some good practice case studies showcasing where the sector is already doing net zero for a number of the business champion work. And finally, on this slide, we're also looking now at a place-based approach to net zero. So we've had early discussions now with the local enterprise network, who are quite supportive of this, and we're starting to now explore this locally. For example, with Wiltshire Council as one of our partners, and what this looked like as a local approach, given the kind of the community benefits and also the net zero priorities in terms of building out carbon efficiency, and how that looks and resonates within this sector as a kind of a long-term sustainable model. So do keep an eye out for that. If you are on this call and you're not a partner or not a champion, we would love to have you engaged. So do reach out to me. My email address is on the slides, and the organisers have got mine. We would love to have you on board. So do drop us a line. Next slide, please. So this is just a kind of a key headlines of some of the events that we're involved in from a Construct Zero perspective. As I say, the first 2 bullets there have kind of taken place now. We've got a couple more coming up, but no doubt there'll be many more coming up. So just to kind of sign off from my side, as partners and champions, if you've got any relevant communication opportunities coming up, or whether that's an event, whether that's a think tank article, whether that is something, one of your reports you want some kind of promotional support on, do get in touch with us, and we will be happy to help. That's probably it for me now. I'll hand back. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Stuart. Given that there's a number of questions that have been prompted by what you've both said, I'm minded to touch on a couple of those now before we move on. And the first one I was going to go to is from Sue James, and it's around where we put developments and how does that fit with sustainable transport. And you sort of touched on it a little bit there, Stuart. If I could ask you to, can you see the questions? No, I couldn't. No, that's because I'm.
No, I can't see the questions, Andy.
Okay, where we put developments, how will the link between development sites and sustainable public transport be put into practice? Currently, developments are taking place, but in many cases, the sustainable transport is not. If I could ask you to comment on that, and then perhaps switch to Hannah, because I've then got another follow-up question that Hannah's probably best placed to answer. So, did you want to consider that particular question, please?
Yes, I think that's one of the things we'll be looking at, Andy, and thanks for the question. So we've it was interesting. I was on a conference in Sydney last week, and one of the things that's really kind of is about the value of the place-based approach to net zero, and kind of how you build it, buildings in a sustainable transport angle, and how that kind of works for a long-term sustainable model. So we will be looking at that as part of the kind of the place-based approach, and I've already started conversations, as I say, with the LEP network, and trying to kind of understand what local communities across the country are doing. I think what, as Hannah kind of outlined at the start of the call, we're not looking to reinvent this. So we'll be looking to understand what is already taking place and how we can promote and share that. So if there are models of good practice happening in your kind of local networks, your local enterprise networks across the country that kind of fit into that, we will be looking to share that. So really, this is one of the areas which we're really keen to engage in. So if you wanted to drop me a line directly, very happy to pick it up offline and see if we can work on that going forwards.
Okay, thank you. You must be able to see the questions. The other question that Sue had was buildings and places. Not sure what is meant by places. confused by the emphasis in the report on nutrient pollution. And let me pick up the nutrient pollution piece. One of the things that has come through quite a lot from the task force members is the new or recent approach to limiting planning permission while there are concerns of nutrient pollution in that area, with the ambition of making new developments nutrient pollution neutral or whatever. And of course the issue there is a lot of the nutrient pollution is coming from agriculture, and there's only so much you could achieve with the new housing development. And I don't know that we meant there to be disproportionate emphasis on that. It was certainly something that is exercising a lot of minds over the past few months and is going to continue for some while. So that was the reason for that. The buildings and places, and the reason I wanted to go to Hannah was this came from the naming of that horizontal piece was when Hannah was leading that on behalf of the ACE. So who better to go and ask, what do we mean by places?
Thanks, Andy. So you're basically saying it's my fault.
Your inspiration is what I meant.
Thanks. So where we got to with that, if you look at the four sort of the strands together, you've got infrastructure, which is obviously quite often national or at least regional. We had RMI, which is repairs and maintenance and things. And so what we were lacking really is a focus on, if you think particularly the kind of segments in the built environment, that focus on buildings and focus and the sort of businesses as well that will operate in a smaller geographic area. So what we did was group the that part or that segment of the industry and the supply chains that work within that. And I can say this from Mace, we obviously have a big presence in London and the southeast, so part of us actually would sit and align well with the buildings and places part. This isn't just about SMEs, it's about giving a place for businesses and clients that operate either in the building sphere, so looking at commercial property, residential property, and those which are looking at being more sort of tied geographically somewhere to fit within the CLC structure. So it was quite important that we sort of recognise that, rather than just get it lost in between some of the strands of the other work streams. So that was the thinking behind that. And actually looking at that, we had some really good some good successes last year with it. So things like influencing the UK Infrastructure Bank, that was done through the Buildings and Places work stream, because actually there was an awful lot with their levelling up ambitions that we need to have a collective conversation around, whether that was councils, developers, SME builders that will work in a geographic area, or what could the UK Infrastructure Bank do usefully to help that segment of the industry. So it has worked well in practice, albeit it's a slightly unusual name. Just wanted to add something to what Stuart said on the first point around lower carbon transport as well. That's our third priority within the 9 priority structure of Construct Zero. And so therefore we are looking at best practice, but we're also looking at being able to sort of monitor the sector's progress. So we're already starting to monitor things like how many EV charging points, for example, is the sector installing. So we do get a handle on what we're doing to kind of contribute to that, even if it's only in a kind of enabling capacity. So yes, I'll finish there, I think, Andy.
Okay, thank you very much. So one more question, then we'll go to Peter Capelhorn on building safety, and I'm going to bring Mark Reynolds in on this one. But the question is, how much control does the industry really have considering client requirements, and what is the real impact of how to deliver the client requirements in a net zero manner, i.e. when you consider the whole project footprint, how big a percentage is the delivery construction method? And that was from Christopher Patfield. For me, there's two points to reflect on there. One is the infrastructure client group, which anchors the key infrastructure horizontal, was done in recognition that you've got to have the clients in the room, and you've got to have the clients because ultimately it's those that set the requirements and put out the tenders and all of that. And the other point, and Fergus will touch on this later with the construction playbook, is recognizing the hugely important role that the government clients, the DFE, MOJ, the hospitals, etc., etc. And we've been talking recently about how do we form potentially stronger links with those purchasing government departments. And I wonder if Mark wanted to comment on that a little bit, and then we'll move on to Peter.
Thanks, Andy. So certainly in terms of the major bodies, so whether it's DfE, MOJ, they're very much working as programs. So connecting in with them when we're dealing with it across several aspects, not just Construct Zero, but skills, competencies, etc. So there's been really good dialogue going on there. How that gets then communicated through the supply chain is very much through those leads and the individual program leads, project leads, and tier 1 contractors. And if you look at what's going on with the MOJ, as an example, then they're setting some quite strong targets across the board, particularly around net zero and modern methods of construction. So it's make all of the objectives we've sent out through the CLC of trying to improve productivity, efficiency, upskilling, all being achieved through those programs. Now, it's much easier on the bigger programs than it is on more the fragmented programs, particularly when we look at RMI and the remainder of the industry. So I think our big challenge for all of us is how do we get those learnings that we're getting from the major programs and client bodies to what is the majority of the industry. And that's where part of the playbook will come in, and also some organisations picking up the government playbook and taking that into a private sector playbook as well. So it's that best practice being rolled out. I'm not sure, Andy, I've entirely answered all of the question, but I think between Peter and we cover off our points, we'll highlight the changes that are beginning to be seen and how we want to drive that further through the industry and support the industry going forward.
Okay, thank you. So can I just check, do we have Minister Rowley with us now?
We do. We just asked the Minister, he's just turning on his mic and camera as we speak. I can see that his mic's on and the camera button's just the one below that.
Right, okay, well then I think we'll put Peter on ice, if we may, and hand over to Lee if he's now ready to go.
Morning all, and thank you very much. Firstly, apologies for the slight technical issues. I have been on for almost all of the session, so I've been listening to you all and looking forward to continuing it. It's good to looking forward to the conversation in the coming hour. I'm not going to take up too much time, but I did just want to say hello. Thank Andy for his comments so far. Really interesting discussion on Construct Zero just now, and thank you to Hannah and Stuart for their presentation. It's a hugely important area of policy and one that I've been particularly looking at and being interested in since I joined as the Minister a few months ago, five and a bit months ago now. And really just wanted to say thank you to you all for joining today. The Construction Leadership Council does fantastic work across a wide range of issues, and I've seen that in my first 5 months in the job, and so it's really good to be able to join you today. We obviously have a substantial and significant number of macro issues affecting both the construction sector and other sectors at the moment, not least the challenges around the last 10-11 days or so, which are hugely worrying, but also have implications for individual sectors and individual industries as well. And so my job as a government minister is to make sure that construction's voice is heard within all of that, and in order to do that I rely upon the Construction Leadership Council, all of the fantastic expertise that is within that, and then yourselves as well, to tell me and to tell officials within BEIS about how things are going, where we can do better, and where your key focuses are at the moment. And I think one of the reasons why I was so keen to come today was so that we can hear that. So I'm not going to say anything much more than that, other than looking forward to the discussion and the Q&A as we go through and towards the end, and to say a huge thank you to you all for everything you have done again over a very challenging year and what looks to have, albeit very different, but continuing challenges in the coming year as well. And I'm looking forward to the conversation today where I'm sure we will touch on some of those.
Okay, thank you, Lee. Right, we're going to move to Peter, but if I could just ask Stuart in the Q&A, could you post openly your email? There's a couple of questions coming in about invites to the event on the 16th, and I think the simplest thing to do is if you put your email in there, then people can pick up on that. Right, so now we're on to building safety. Peter.
Andy, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I'm not going to be using slides, so you'll have to put up with me just as a talking head. And the first thing I should say is that I chair this group for the CLC with Graham Watts, who many of you will know, Chief Exec of CIC. And Graham and I are very much like a pair of weather dolls. You'll rarely see the pair of us together on anything. And in fact, some people imply that we're the same person, but I don't think that's true at all. So this is actually a really important subject, and it's really quite serious. And of course, you know, we reflect on everything that has come forward from the Grenfell disaster. And of course, we sort of look at all of the issues that have come through Dame Judith Hackett's report, and then also from the public inquiry. And unfortunately, the facts and evidence still continue to pour out of the inquiry. And of course, everybody across the construction sector has been stunned, amazed, and appalled in equal measure. So it is really, really important that the CLC has a major focus on building safety. And in particular, it's important because there are so many different diverse but interconnecting elements of this. It's easy to say we need culture change, we need to put behind us all of the practices that led to Grenfell, and we need to move the industry on. But how do we actually do that? And so the group that Graham and I chair are really, I think, is really fundamental to helping that go forward. Before I do that, I just wanted to say, though, that I think if we contextualize this work, we had quite a significant period after Grenfell of assessment. Why on earth did we get into this situation? Looking at some of the historical facts that for me go right back to the Summerland disaster in the early 70s. A lot of issues there affecting the construction industry, and then coming up to date, those interfaces with building practice, but also with how we all use and work with regulation. So then we've had a period of actually reviewing and understanding what needs to be done, and that's where this group comes in and why it is so fundamental as to how we go forward. And we are looking towards this year and next in terms of the delivery phase of what all that work means. At the same time, a crucial element to this is to make sure that industry and government are working together, are harmonizing their efforts, are making sure that where we have prospective regulation, policy, and emerging principles, that industry understands those and can work with government in a really serious effort to make sure that no stone is unturned to make sure we make the progress we intend to. So then turning to specifically the CLC group itself, we decided that because so many elements of the industry were already working on lots of effort towards the general topic of building safety, we needed to use the CLC's reach, to use the CLC's position within the industry, primarily to showcase all of that work, to ensure that there is no duplication as best we can, and to make sure that we join up people across all of those groups. And believe me, there are lots of them. Colleagues in Bays have mapped out what we see as being all the activities, and they do amount to a huge amount of work. And I suspect that quite a few of you on the call today will be part of some of that huge effort. And that is starting to change the industry. And of course, change we need to. And so what we have formulated is a coordination group of all of the parts of the industry who are currently working on programs supporting building safety. That group meets monthly at the moment, And we also have to ensure that the focus, the direction, and the concentration is there. We have a challenge group as well, a smaller group chaired by Andy and Fayanne Simpson. And the idea behind that is to just make sure that we have that focus that is so important to making progress. When you're involved in such a huge amount of work as this, it is sometimes difficult to see the wood for the trees. So that challenge group for me is really important. The coordination group has met quite a few times since we started this program working in the latter part of last year. And what we are doing at each meeting is to showcase several of the efforts of the members of the group. The principle behind that is to make sure that everybody in that community knows about all of the detail of all of the things that are going on. And by doing that, we are bringing together the whole industry and making sure that everybody is working in the same direction. And we also, by doing that process, make sure that indeed government colleagues also understand all the efforts that industry is making. In addition to that, we are developing a comms plan, again in consultation with Stuart's colleagues, and that is really important as well, to make sure that all of this effort is well understood, and again well understood right across the whole industry, but well understood right across government. That to me is so important. We are expending a huge amount of man hours and efforts to make sure that we get all of these things landed. So it is so important that everybody understands what is going on, how they can contribute, but equally, I think for me, it's really important that everybody understands this means everybody in the industry. There is nobody that's excluded from the need to focus on building safety and everything that stems from it. So what are our focuses in terms of the CLC work? Primarily, we've picked up some of the key challenges that confront building safety right now, and we're starting to work through them. So they're identified in the annual report, but just very quickly, if I can just go through them. I think there won't be anybody in the industry who doesn't realise that insurance currently is a really significant topic. We have an insurance group, and they are trying to unlock some of the real tricky questions that are affecting just about everybody, and it doesn't matter what form of insurance you're connected with, it is currently a problem, and that's because the industry effectively is regarded as a highly risky proposition by the insurance industry. So we've made some progress, but I think at the moment it is still a really tricky question to unlock, and that work will continue through this year. We've also spent a huge amount of effort on competence. When the analysis post Grenfell took place, it was clear that competence was all over the place in terms of its robustness, its clarity, whether actually people could clearly identify any particular part of the industry was truly competent. That is changing, and certainly the Competence Steering Group has done a huge amount of work towards that. We have 12 groups that have produced 2 reports. Thousands of man hours are going into this, and we're now firmly in the phase of delivering on that, so that competence across the construction industry will be something where we can rely on it. We can robustly prove that the people doing any part of the effort in building assets are provably competent, and that to me is really important. And then quickly, there are just 3 others. Really, construction products, obviously a crucial element to this whole conversation. We are about to launch the Code for Construction Product Information. That is fundamental in changing the approach to the trust that everybody has in the information being produced by the industry. That scheme is going live towards the end of this month, and it is a fundamental step forward in making sure that on the ground we have the right information. As part of the product work, we also have Whistling, that's fabulous. I don't know where that came from. Anyway, we are working on joining up the digital information across products. That is the lexicon project that we've been working on for some time, and that will land this year as well. And then making sure that we have the digitalization of the whole sector. There's the golden thread and the work that we've been doing in conjunction with the BRAC committee on how exactly that information is gathered and how it is stored to make sure that everybody understands exactly what has been produced through the building's design, construction and use phases. And then finally, I mentioned the comms plan. It's our intention to really bolster the engagement and information across the industry. And as I said at the start, using the CLC's reach and connections to make sure that, again, this really important topic is understood by everybody. And I think that's the crucial thing, where all of the people in the room already know the topic. We need to reach the people outside of the room and make sure that everybody understands it's their job to ensure buildings are always safe. That's me, Andy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Peter. So a couple of questions were coming in. One you have answered, which is what work are you doing with DLUC on building safety? And the answer is a huge amount. Anyway, they are the governing government department here, and I hope that's clear. That was from Dana Rafati. And there was another question, the Andrew Eldred question around does the government building regulator understand the scale of the competence gap and the fact that it's going to take years and extra infrastructure? And I believe so. As Peter says, it's something that's talked about a huge amount. And the rollout campaign this year, which is a really big part of what I think the CLC can achieve, is all part of that. And hopefully starting with a summit where we can declare a number of things as part of a industry piece. So I think we've got that. And I think the time has come now to move on to Mark Reynolds. There are a couple of other questions that have come in that I'm saving up for the end. So if I could now hand over to Mark to talk about meeting the skills challenge.
Thank you, Andy. Jordan, do you have my slides? Thanks, that's brilliant. Hopefully everyone can see that clearly. First of all, I'm going to begin with a few thank yous. I'd like to thank the Skills Network, which is over 50 people involved with that, who contribute to monthly meetings and other meetings throughout that. And then secondly, the leaders who pull everything together. So the 6 workstream leaders have done a fabulous job over the last 18 months, pulling every subgroup together and coordinating their activities. And then finally, the CITB, who've been acting as our program lead. So thank you very much for that. My next point is just, people may not be aware that even before this year and previously, the skills group has done a tremendous amount of work putting together apprentice standards, working with IFATE to speed up the process to getting those standards approved. We also work through, and this is a CLC role, about convening the industry, bringing people together, and things like the Brexit shorted occupation list was all coordinated through the CLC, led by Seeker, and made sure we got as much comprehensive trades listed under the shortage occupation list. Jordan, can I have the next slide, please? What I'd like to highlight is the scale of the challenge we have for our industry. CITB do their Construction Skills Network report annually, and the new one is going to come out in the next month. And last year's one is a 5-year period from 21 to 25, indicated that we needed over 217,000 new workers over that 5-year period, new jobs being created. That's 43,000 new jobs a year. So assume people are leaving the industry through retirement, on top of that, 43,000 new jobs. If you then add around the RMI target to increase investment in green technologies, green approaches to meet the net zero carbon targets, the industry is going to need circa 350,000 by 2028. So you can conservatively say over the next 7 years, 8 years, this industry is going to need circa 80,000 new people a year. And currently, we have a vacancy list through the National Audit Office, which published Q4 last year, of a gap around 42,000 vacancies in the industry. Now, that's not as bad as some industries, but you can see some of the challenges we face. So recruitment, bringing people in, training them up is absolutely vitally important. And we lost through the pandemic around about 100,000 people through mainly self-employed skills workers from the industry. Next slide, please, Jordan. And just to continue that, just to looking at apprentices, and we look at the apprenticeship benchmark 2018-2019. From the period August to November of those years, we had about 19,000 intake in 18-19. That led to about 27,000 starts, apprentice starts. And if you look at 2021, we fell woefully short. We had 10,000 starts with about 20,000 apprentices in 2021. Understandably, because people had a lot of uncertainty, there weren't many starts, but that's where a lot of the government interventions, particularly around the £3,000 take per apprentice, has really worked. But we shouldn't forget, for those who are CITB organisations affiliated to CITB and pay their levies, there is also opportunity to take the grants from those processes for £8,500 a year. So for a graduate through their term level up to level 2, £11,500 for level 3 people. The good news is 2021 and 2022 looks to be on par with the benchmark year 18-19. So that's all good news. And what we're seeing is starts by levels. So traditional trade level, bricklayers level 2, carpenters level 2 are actually down slightly this year. But level 3 is up, which is actually a positive movement, because that's showing that we're upskilling our workforce. So there's some opportunities here, but we need more. We need to take on more apprentices, more graduates into the industry if we're going to fill this skills gap of circa 80,000 people a year. So let me just move on to very briefly within the next slide, please, Jordan. Very briefly, where we are on achievements through the skills, people and skills network. In March last year, we launched the, should be say March 2021, we launched the industry skills plan, which is a comprehensive plan setting out what we would do, both government and industry, across 6 main work streams. So employment culture, culture and employment, apprentices, FE and T levels, higher education, competencies, and modern skills for the industry. I won't go through all of the detail, the things we were looking at there, but there's some interesting things. One thing that this is important to remember, and if everyone can bear this in mind, is how we get behind industry initiatives. So initiatives to the culture and employment is the Fairness and Inclusion Respect Assessment Tool. Let's not invent another tool. Let's use something that we can all get behind and really make a difference, so we can get everyone up to a good standard. The Kickstart, the government support for Kickstart was fantastic. Over 3,100 jobs were published and advertised, and 580 jobs were created through the Kickstart program. If we look at apprentices, the apprentice levy being opened up, so simplifying the apprentices program. Over £1.2 million have been pledged by 11 employers to date, and that really, there's a lot more opportunity to take benefit and help people, help SMEs particularly, move forward through the industry. Some of the challenges you have around making sure people are work ready. Nearly 40,000 people enter the industry on full-time education, but actually only 30% of them get a job at the end of it. This is why T levels are important. We start using T levels to help people really get jobs, so they're work ready when they come through the industry. And these are some of the programs we're trying to drive through. Building on higher education, how do we use higher education to make sure that the skills for the future are really embedded, and how industry can work much more closely with academia. And Peter's already mentioned the importance of competencies. This group has been led by Andrew Elder, driving really through the Building Safety Competence Working Group 2, which is all about installers. So looking at fire, dry lining, fire detection, fire alarms, fire stopping, plumbing, rain screen, cladding and roofing. So these are the skills that we can start embedding the competencies and set a roadmap for us going forward, where we've got competency assessing, that golden thread right the way through the industry. And we will need an industry database to capture all of that information. And then finally, around skills for modern industry going forward, is how do we embrace digital? How do we embrace modern methods of construction? And develop those training programs so we've got an industry that is fit for purpose going forward over the next 10 years. Real credit goes back to CITB and government supporting Talent View and the construction talent retention system, which was launched during the pandemic. So encourage everyone to use that as a source for keeping people in the industry and bringing new people in the industry. And as Andy said, we're working extremely closely with government, fantastic links with the Government Construction Skills Delivery Group, are really helping us through a number of initiatives, and I'll explain that in a second on the next slide. Jordan, can we move to the next slide, please? So the Construction Skills Delivery Group is an initiative led by government, supported by academia and industry. And it's Peter Mucklow from DFE leading with Fergus Harrod and Bays. But we also have involvement from DWP, HMT, Cabinet Office, DLUC, and both industry training bodies, so ECITB and CITB. And a number of areas looking at, I've already mentioned the apprentice levy transfers, front loading apprentices, so we can get apprentice skills up front, how we can get accelerated apprentices, flexi apprentices, allows people, organisers, companies to recruit someone, but do it with confidence. If they can't finish their apprenticeship program, they can be moved to other employers so that we can continue with those skills in the industry. And people coming into apprenticeships can be confident that they can maintain their jobs throughout. Providing the apprentice levy incentive, which the £3,000 is essential to keep boosting the number of apprentices we have in the industry. And T levels I've already mentioned about making sure that we've got work ready. And in areas that we're underutilising is around occupational traineeships and boot camps. How we can really use these to upskill people from level 2 to level 3. And this will be particularly relevant as we move into the green economy. So fantastic work showing the policy interventions that really do make a difference. And moving on to what we're trying to achieve in, next slide please, Jordan. What we're trying to achieve through the group over the next 12 months is really building on the fairness, inclusion and respect momentum that we've already established, and building that industry position so that people see working in the built environment can have a massive impact on working lives, both how we tackle the climate change, how we can actually create better working conditions, better living conditions throughout. So it's really an industry that people want to join and see that it's got a long-term future. We want to make sure that we get the apprentices higher than pre-pandemic levels, and importantly make sure that completion rates are much higher as well. And this is where policy interventions will really help us. Being aware that the CLC is working with government to make sure it's easy for everyone in the industry to take those benefits. We want to scale up the traineeships and the boot camps and communicate the support that T levels can give. And in construction, there was 1,200 placements in 2021 and 2,500 in 21-22. And we really want to increase that to over 5,000 placements in the next few years. So we really need industry to get behind that. And we want to establish a plan where we can work with higher education, particularly around developing digital skills, modern methods of construction, and the right behaviours that we need for a modern and effective industry. I've already mentioned the 6 skills and the frameworks, but this is making sure they're embedded in this through 2022, and these competency frameworks are really working for everyone. So we can use these as pilots to roll out through many, many other trades. And then finally, around the skills of the future, is building on those skills, which is constantly evolving. You know, areas, things like the Transforming Construction Challenge, which is a fantastic innovation support through IUK, how we can build those lessons into our programs going forward. So my final slide is really about a request. Jordan, move. Next slide, please. Now, this is what we can all do. We must significantly increase the number of apprenticeships that we recruit as employers throughout the industry. We must utilise the government programmes. These policy interventions are so important. You know, I'm really proud that the construction industry was seen by the Skills Minister, Alex Burkhardt, as a place to go to launch Apprentice Week. We are getting traction. We just need to keep pushing forward with everything we're doing. We are getting fantastic support with DFE, CITB. We need to support back, which is the further education colleges, bringing those together. And we need to work with FEs and HEs to really support them. And one of the industry challenges we face at the present time is the lack of tutors. Now, as people leave the industry, we should be looking at how we can upskill our current workforce to become tutors, to train the people that we want to be leading our industry in the future. So if you want to get involved, you need more information, please speak to Jackie Ducker. She leads the skills network for us. She coordinates the working group and she's bringing us together. And what we will be doing early in the next couple of months is launching a targeted action plan for 22 and 23. So as I say, if you want to get involved, please let us know. Please email Jackie and we'll look forward to getting you involved and helping us take things forward. Thank you, Andy.
Okay, thank you, Mark. I've got 4 questions that have come in for you, which I know you'll be familiar with, but I thought I'd give a heads up to my colleagues on a couple of other questions. There's one which I think should go to Lee. Not now, but I'll give you a bit of a chance, get Mark to answer his questions, and there's another one coming in for Peter. So Lee's question was from Robert Lamb. The dreadful situation in Ukraine has heightened concerns over the energy infrastructure and dependence on Russian gas. How might this impact on the programme for retrofit of existing buildings to reduce the energy demand? So I'll leave that one with you. Peter, a little bit later for you, the relationship between the CPA and the CPE, and how does that work? But let's go to Mark's. Mark, this is from Ian McIlwee. Mark, useful numbers on apprenticeships. Are we tracking the completions? We're looking at the Canadian report last week as a comparative, and the completion rates there are a concern. Couldn't find a UK comparative, and we know in our sector that we're driven by things like Section 106s and whatever. You get lots of starts, but not necessarily the finishes. So what are we doing about that?
Yeah, it's a good question, Ian, and I can always rely on you asking the right question. So let's just, we are tracking it. One of the things that I think is becoming really impressive, and it's how we are all beginning to use data much more efficiently now. DFE are building those databases. The fact that we can look at every skill, how many starts, how many completions are being reviewed. DFE do have those figures, and we monitor those every month. The reality is they're only updated every quarter, and they're always a little bit, they take about another 6 weeks for us to come through and to get the data. So our real challenge is how do we get that more quickly, and then we can act upon those. So we do have the data, we are working on it. In fairness, it's only just been put in place in the last 12 months. It's becoming more accurate as we start building those. So we just need to work on what we need in terms of the demand. Are we driving that pipeline, and are we making sure that we've got the right skills in the right place and the completion? So this isn't it's the whole end-to-end process that we're looking at in terms of demand, capability, skills, through the colleges, through the employers, making sure that we've got the competencies such that we then got the completion numbers as well. So you know yourself within the dry lining sector how important that is, and any help that you can bring within your trade body and your members will be really helpful. So thank you. I'm happy to have a more detailed conversation with you offline.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Next question from Jenny McLaughlin. How do we ensure that apprenticeships are accessible to all, in particular those with disabilities and or neurodiversity?
Yeah, I think we have to be realistic with where they can be applied, but there's certainly, that's one of the areas that we're trying to drive on the agenda. We're moving much higher up on the agenda than we did perhaps 3 years ago. So that's the whole reason for getting behind the Fairness and Inclusion and Respect programme, is that we can create the visibility that where that suits people most. So that is very much going to be part of our 22-23 plan and how we can drive that forward more. There are places like Go Construct which drive that, and obviously around even the apprentice website and Talent View, where you can apply for those jobs. Anyone could apply for those jobs, and this is where we want to encourage those networks to be much more vocal. And you see many organisations are really pushing this forward in their own business. So we need to make that visible and clearer. And it's a good point that we should perhaps think about that, how we can enhance that through Talent View. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Final one here, then there's another one around, a couple around geography, which I think the Minister would want to contribute on as well. So the question from Anne Vesey is, any news on whether the £3,000 employer incentive for apprenticeships will be reintroduced?
Is that for me or is that for Lee?
If you've got the answer, go for it. Other than that, we'll pass it over to Lee.
We have raised that, and I think that's more of a government policy overall. But we've said that we've been informed that perhaps that may not be occurring at the present time. But Lee's better placed to answer that one, I'm afraid.
Okay, so there's a couple queuing up for Lee here now. So if you wanted to address that one, Lee, then I'll bring in a couple of others around geography and levelling up.
Sure. Well, I mean, obviously that is a DfE area rather than a BEIS area, and my job is to make sure your voice is heard. I know that there are, I'm afraid I'm going to probably have to give you a bit of a politician's answer. There is obviously a lot of discussion going on about how best to structure our skills offer and our apprenticeships offer over the coming years ahead, and I know that is being considered and will be fed in, but at the moment I'm afraid I don't have anything to add other than what is publicly known already.
Okay,
sorry.
Thank you. So one on geography that I think Mark might tee up, and then I think that follows through to the next one, which I think is a ministerial question. So first one is there a geographical heat map in terms of what jobs are needed where? I'm interested to understand if there is an equal gap across the country, or are there a number of centres where jobs are required more than others? And that's from Christopher Patfield.
Yeah, the best document to look at is the CITB's Construction Skills Network report. That highlights the jobs available across each region, so northwest, northeast, Greater London, southeast, west, so across the whole country, and that breaks it down both by so the 217,000 that I mentioned at the beginning, that breaks it down by the 15 top trades. I think it's 15. Management tend to get bulked together, but they're all highlighted in both by trade, number, and or skills and location. And one of the things that we've been working with the CITB is to make that much more clear. So they used to do it really well in 2017, 18, 19, it got less clear, and we felt that it was really valuable information. So it's been brought back on the agenda. And as I mentioned earlier, the importance is being able to see that route through. So from need, encouraging the various regions where the skills are going to be needed, and what training provision, employment provision do we need going forward. Now, what it doesn't do is focus on future skills so much. It deals with what's the immediate 5 years. So it's not forward looking in terms of the next 10 years, which is why the skills group is doing that work around what the skills going to be needed and how we'll transition over the next 10 years. And then the other one that actually is looked at and has also been shared, and it's is how green skills will transform the industry going forward. So this is where we're working quite closely with the ECITB through the Construction Skills Delivery Group in terms of where goes those heat maps exactly for new green skills. So when we're looking at carbon capture, for example, it isn't necessarily aligned with construction, but northeast, Teesside is really important about how we make sure that those skills in that area are going to be right, fit for purpose for us going forward. So we are looking at that data. I think for the most of it, it is all accessible. You just need to know where to find it, unfortunately. And perhaps that's something that we should look at, how we make that more clear going forward. So, but that's a good question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mark. So building on that one, a question from Matt Bennion, and I think we'll pass this to the Minister. T-levels are a great initiative, but the geographic coverage of colleges is poor. What will government do to increase the supply side of the market and level up opportunity across the country? The demand is certainly there.
Good question. I mean, obviously T-levels remain at a relatively early stage in their development, although there's some really great work underway at the moment. I know there's a huge amount of work, thinking going on about how best to make that work for communities up and down the country. I represent one of those communities which falls into one of the areas which is being focused on for levelling up, although all across the country is being focused on at the same time. So I think there is more to be done here. We've got to try and map together the offer that's there today and the iterations that are coming to that, or government policy changes over time. And so, you know, DFE as the lead in this area will do that. Then the new opportunities that are coming in, T-levels, etc., so we can provide a coherent and clear offer to young people and to people wanting to get into individual sectors all across the country. That's going to take time. I was only on Thursday at Moulton College in Northamptonshire talking about this with a group of people in the construction sector. Really interesting feedback. We value all of your feedback so that we can pass that on to the DFE and make sure we're clear about, from a construction perspective, how we would like that structured in the years ahead.
And if you don't mind me just adding to that, there is the DFE, again, this is something we've seen through the Construction Skills Delivery Group, have actually the T-level team have got a fantastic presentation that show how they've moved from 1,200 to 2,500 construction, but actually it's over 5,000 plus for across the whole industry, and it's all different skills and different. So whether it's accountants or each course, and there is a heat map that shows all of that, so it's pretty comprehensive. And Matt, I'm happy to share that as well. So if people are interested, we can share that presentation. The DFE will be keen to present that to groups who are interested. It's comprehensive and it's evolving very quickly.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Well, I think we're going to have to wrap that up. We've got one more subject to touch on. Do we have Fergus Harradence with us now?
Fergus is just trying to dial in via phone. I believe he is here. Fergus, if you're there, could you say something for us?
Yeah, I'm here. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, we just unfortunately won't be able to get you up on camera because of with the phone issue, but he is here, so I'll hand back over.
Okay, so Fergus, thank you, welcome. I've one question that came in earlier, which was around the playbook, which I thought you could cover while you're saying, what you've got to say. Fundamentally, do the policies of the playbook need to become law? It's something that we've discussed about how much has to be legislated versus encouraged, and I know that that's talked about a lot. But with that, I'll hand over to you.
Okay. I'll pick that up towards the end of my session on the playbook. But the reason for wanting to have a slot at this meeting was just to flag to everybody who's a stakeholder of the Construction Leadership Council that we are, as government, currently in the process of undertaking the first refresh of the construction playbook since it was published in December 2020. Now, the aim is not to completely rewrite the document over the next 2 to 3 months because of the amount of effort that went into the playbook originally, the fact that it's been generally well received, and also because it is still bedding down. So we haven't got a huge amount of feedback from people about what is and what isn't working. But nevertheless, what we are trying to do is to revise and update the content, either where there have been some significant developments in terms of new policies or initiatives or approaches, or where we have got feedback from people that they think that some elements of the playbook aren't as clear as they could be, they don't provide an adequate level of direction to people, or they think there's a degree of ambiguity about what's meant, or it's not entirely consistent with something else that's stated in the playbook. So in order to produce the second draft, there are currently a few work streams. I'm chairing the one on net zero carbon, where we're looking at the content relating to that theme all the way through the playbook. And we're going to make some recommendations about how that can be strengthened and how that can link with some of the initiatives that have been launched, not least the Construct Zero initiative, but also some of the things that have come out of COP26 and some of the policy announcements like PPN 0621 that was issued last year. There's another strand of work which is looking at how we can enhance the section on digitisation, and as well as emphasising the importance of things like BIM technologies, look beyond that at things like integrating digital payment systems or contract management systems within the supply chain, how we can use digitisation to drive productivity, efficiency and better outcomes. We're also looking at the section on frameworks and contracting to take account of the work that Professor David Mosey did in relation to the gold standard of frameworks, and to emphasise the importance of that. And then finally, there's also another strand of work which is looking at the issue of building safety, and that is trying to take account of the developments that are going to be the industry is going to be required to adapt to over the course of this year as a result of the Building Safety Bill, and what more advice and guidance we can work into the playbook about these issues. So just to conclude, this is an ongoing process. We would welcome any views, comments or feedback that people have. Please do feed this in as quickly as possible. I think it is worth making one point, which is to say that we don't envisage using this exercise to fundamentally change a great deal of the content or fundamentally change the structure of the playbook. Those two are really givens. But what we are trying to do is address any points that we can, and in particular, try and improve the clarity, access to resources, and make sure that the playbook is as coherent a whole as it can be and continues to act as an effective guide for the whole process of procurement, from the point at which you've identified the need and you're looking to engage the market, right the way through the procurement process, the contract management aspect of the process, and then to the point of handover of the completed asset. If anybody has got any questions, then I'm more than happy to answer them now, or do feel free to drop me a line separately and I will be happy to pick them up and talk more to anybody about the process. Just to answer the question though that was posed earlier about whether or not we need to legislate for the playbook. I think given the nature of the playbook, it would be quite difficult to legislate for everything in it. I think there are some elements of it that you could say should be set out in probably not legislation actually, but perhaps the procurement regulations, which apply to public sector organisations. That said, I don't think everything in the playbook could be treated in that way, because a lot of it is really about good practice, capability within organisations, and actually its ways of working. I don't think there's ever been a lot in the playbook that is particularly revolutionary. It's simply a compendium of good practice covering all stages of the process. And what was really new about the playbook was that we brought all of that together in a document for the first time. So I don't think there would be a great deal of support within government for the idea of legislating to enforce the playbook. And I'm not sure that is really a practical proposition. But certainly what we are trying to do is make sure that the policies within it are followed by those organisations which have to do that, so the ones within central government. But what we're also trying to do this time around is to increase the level of content that's relevant to the wider public sector, particularly local authorities, to encourage them to take more account of the playbook and do more to embed it in their own approaches and procurement exercises.
Okay, thank you, Fergus. So we've got 7 or 8 minutes left. So I've got a number of questions that I'd like to come back and touch on. And first one for Lee, there were 2 questions. One from Sue James, which was around how do we create a more, oh blimey, it's all jumped around. How do we create a more climate and ecologically literate generation? And her question was around tying up the views and the needs of BEIS with DFE. Dan Macy asked a similar question, which is how can we collectively seek to have construction enter the curriculum from year 7 secondary? So really about how do we get the best direction from the area of industry that you cover, and how do we best influence future education?
So on the first question about the climate, this is an interesting question. I don't get the sense from when I go into schools that there is a problem with visibility on this or a problem with interest in this. Quite the reverse. Interest in this, quite the reverse. I think the area where we probably need to think through in more detail, again, interested in industry's views, is making sure that the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years are not just going to be about saying that things should be done. They're not just going to be about defining the problem, which is often what a lot of the last 15, 20 years has been about getting people on the same page around the problem. But it's also about understanding that people have agency in terms of the choices they make. People have choices about the careers they wish to pursue, about the actions they want to take, and that ultimately that when they're thinking about these things, when they're thinking about the climate, and they're saying absolutely things that we all say about how important it is, we tread more lightly on the earth, etc., etc., we are tying that to real actual outputs and changes that can be made, and also accepting and recognizing that there is a degree of nuance in that discussion. I have a diesel car. A diesel car is no longer seen as, you know, the thing which people should go to. Everybody's very excited about electric cars, but ultimately my diesel car is 14 years old and I'm going to run it into the ground because it's more useful, given the embodied carbon in that, to finish off before it becomes useless than to go out and buy another electric car. It's those sort of thinking the next stage along, getting people to think more nuanced, which I think is the area where we probably want to think in more detail. And then on the curriculum, this is something which is talked about in many different sectors, and I cover a lot of sectors, about how do we link what we're doing and the fantastic work that's been done in a particular sector such as yours, and making sure that people are aware of it. I think the challenge if the DFE were here is that they would say there is a infinite set of requests to always change curricula in a particular way to emphasize the very important issue or concern or sector or whatever. And ultimately, there's a finite amount of things that DfE can mandate in curricula before the whole curricula starts to become so prescriptive that very little can be done. So I think we're going to be a little bit cautious on that. But in terms of should we make sure that construction has a high profile in schools, absolutely, and I hope we can do some more on that in the coming months.
Okay, thank you. So we're into the final minute. So quick question for Stuart, just picking up the earlier. Tell us about the meeting on the 16th. What are we trying to do there?
So the meeting on the 16th is to launch the second update of the Construct Zero report. So first of all, it's to celebrate that report, and it's to hear from a number of people on the panel, including the Minister, about kind of the achievements today, and sort of having a more of a kind of a focused discussion about what the key challenges are going to be going forward for the construction sector in delivering net zero within the framework of that kind of 9 priorities.
Okay, thank you. And I've been telling people to email you if they want to.
Yes, my inbox has exploded, Andy. Thank you.
You're very welcome, mate. Jolly good. Let's get back on to a question that came in from Jenny McLaughlin. Where within the building safety piece are we making sure that all humans are equitably safe? I guess I would, Peter mentioned the challenge panel, which is that standing back and challenging. Currently, I co-chair that with Fayanne Simpson, who's effectively represents the residents' voice in all of this, which is obviously part of recognizing that all people do need to be treated equally, and that residents do need to be heard and respected and consulted on all of this. But Peter, is anything more you wanted to say there?
Andy, thank you. Yes, I would, because there is, as I mentioned, lots of work going on. And part of that work is about making sure that the new regulations, the new approaches in terms of fire design, that all of the elements of all the work that we're doing address this particular issue as well, because it has been recognised that clearly getting people out of buildings is important, whatever their ability. And so I would anticipate that we're looking at a much greater focus, both in terms of how the codes work, how the regulations work, because I think it's actually been slightly put to one side up until recent times. But I also think that we're going to see a new emphasis on how all these measures are actually played out in the built entity, and that's the important thing. What happens on the ground, and I think I can be very confident that things are going to change.
Okay, thank you. So there's a comment here made by Roy Imerson, who's head of the partnerships at an independent training provider, delivering a wide range of construction trade apprenticeship works. My comment is to make sure the speakers are aware that not all training is run from an FE provision, yet independent groups like that tend to miss out on funding streams, which I think is probably more one that the minister might want to pick up. I'm not suggesting now, because we're just about to run out of time. Could I suggest, Roy, that if you want to email the minister at Bays and follow through on that. Peter, I said I'd bring in the question of the CPA and how close to the CPE.
And very quickly, Andy, we are members of each other, and we continue to have a good dialogue. I'm in contact with their chief exec all the time. And of course, these days, there is a different perspective since we left Europe, but nonetheless, we continue to dialogue to make sure that construction activities are tied up completely.
Okay, thank you. So the final question, which was from Andrew Eldred. Andrew, I'll contact you outside of this meeting. Your question was on the Construction Industry Collective Voice, which is a Scottish group which got renamed in January this year used to be the Construction Industry Coronavirus Forum, and what are we learning from each other? And that's a fair question. We do have Peter Reiki on the Senior Advisors Group. So that's it. I did wonder whether we'd managed to fill all the time, but we've run out of time. A number of questions have come up. If I could go over to Jordan to chime in. How do people get hold of the slides? How do people get to hear the recording?
Yes, I have answers to all those questions. In terms of the slides, we can make sure that they're sent out to the list of everyone who's registered today, so we can take care of that. And also, if they want to get hold of the recording, it's via the exact same link they've joined to watch today. So, but just give us, because it's an hour and a half, it won't be available instantaneously. It has to process, but it should be within the next hour. It's available on demand, and it will live on the website, so it'll be there for as long as you want to come back and watch it again, which there's plenty of information to catch up on there. So I think it's definitely worth another listen. I know there's bits that I'm going to go back and listen to as soon as it's available.
Okay, thank you. So that's it. Minister, as always, pleasure to see you and have you with us. Very much appreciate all the time that you're committing to this. Thanks to the CLC team for all the obvious hard work that's gone into that. And thanks to Jordan and her colleagues for setting this up. We're just the last few minutes gone down to 143, but we're up nearly the 200 mark all the way through this. So a well worthwhile event, well run. Thank you very much to everyone.
Thanks, everyone.